For years, two women stood beside the biggest names in darts, night after night, in front of packed arenas and millions of viewers at home, and then one afternoon, their careers ended with a single text message. Nobody threw them a farewell, nobody said thank you, and the strangest part is that the people accused of demeaning them never got a say, because the loudest fight to save these jobs came from the women being told they were better off without them. These are the darts walk-on girls, and this is what they actually earned. Why they vanished almost overnight in the winter of 2018, and why, 6 years later, they walked back on. Anyone who has watched darts for a while knows the walk-on. The music drops, the crowd erupts, and the player strides toward the oche, and for decades, standing on either side of him, you had the walk-on girls. They never threw a dart, they never scored a leg, their whole job lived in the entrance, the spectacle, the show. Within the space of a single week in January 2018, all of it disappeared. Here is the part most people get wrong. The loudest voices against the ban were not traditionalist fans, and they were not the players either. They came from the women themselves, and once you understand that, the whole story changes shape. Let me start with what the walk-on girls actually were, because the role is more specific than most people remember. These were promotional models who accompanied darts players onto the stage during the walk-on. The theatrical entrance built around each player's chosen music. They came out in pairs, they wore dresses themed to the player, and inside the PDC, the Professional Darts Corporation, they were supplied by a modeling agency called Angels Elite. The role handed the sport glamour and showmanship, yet it carried no sporting function of any kind. Daniela Allfrey, one of the two most recognizable walk-on girls in darts, described the work as being more of a mascot, just being present in what she called a theatrical sport. That framing helps. In a game that leans hard on entrance music, oversized personalities, and pantomime crowds, the walk-on girls were simply part of the theater. How far back does this go? Here I have to be straight with you, because the sources genuinely disagree. The Sun traces walk-on girls to the 1970s, when the game first became televised. ITV's This Morning called them a staple of televised darts for 25 years, which would place the start somewhere around 1993. Allfrey herself said, "Walk-on girls had been around since the 80s, with her agent Karen Cookson being the very first one. Cookson, a pioneer out of Blackpool, said she took over in 1995 and spent years working alongside a fellow walk-on girl named Sue Knight at the Winter Gardens in Blackpool. The exact starting year then is anything but settled, spanning the 70s, the 80s and the mid-90s, depending on who you ask. What we can state safely is that walk-on girls grew out of the early televised era of darts and the familiar pairing format that fans' picture had firmly taken hold by the 1990s. Darts was never alone in this. Formula One had its grid girls, boxing and mixed martial arts had ring girls, cycling had podium girls, and that tradition stretched clean across sport and entertainment. That shared history matters because what happened to darts refused to stay contained inside darts, which carries us straight to the question that pulls most people into a video like this. What were they really paid? I am going to give you the honest answer here, rather than the invented one, because plenty of content about the walk-on girls falls apart at exactly this point. There is no verified, dart-specific pay figure, none at all. No major outlet, not the BBC, not The Guardian, not The Sun, not The Mirror, and no direct interview ever published an actual day rate or per event fee for the darts walk-on role. These women worked self-employed, paid appearance by appearance, and the rate simply never went public. If you stumble across a video or an article confidently naming a specific amount the darts walk-on girls earn per night, treat that number with real suspicion because it does not exist anywhere in the public record. What we do have are the women describing how much of their overall income the darts work represented, and that turns out to be revealing in its own right. Charlotte Wood, the other half of that famous pairing, told BBC, Radio 5 live in early 2018 that darts accounted for roughly 60% of her income. Later, speaking to Daily Star Sport, she pushed the figure higher. Her words were, "Probably about 80% of my income was from the darts. When that stopped, I had to find other routes. Obviously we are self-employed, so we're not under any kind of contract, so when that work stops, it just stops." Allfrey told a strikingly similar story, saying around 80% of their income came from darts. Back in 2018, she had described losing roughly 60% of her income once the ban landed. These are percentages, remember, not amounts, and you will notice Wood's own figure climbs from 60% to around 80% over time. No underlying pound figure sits beneath any of it, which is exactly why you cannot reverse engineer a salary from these numbers. The direction, though, could not be clearer. For these women, darts was never pocket money, it was the majority of their livelihood. The closest thing to a hard figure arrives from a slightly different angle. In March 2018, CNN profiled a promotional model named Melissa James, who worked as a Formula One and touring car grid girl, a boxing ring girl, a darts walk-on girl, and a speedway start line girl all at once. CNN reported that her pay sat well above the UK minimum wage, which stood at £7.50 an hour at the time, and that at some promotional events she would earn up to £140, about $196 in a single day. Here is the catch. And it matters. That £140 day rate covered general promotional modelling across all of her different roles, and it was never stated to be her darts rate specifically. It works as a useful reference point for the kind of money promotional modelling paid at the time, but holding it up and declaring this is what darts walk-on girls earned would be dishonest because the source never says that. For a bit of context, grid girls in Formula One reportedly earned somewhere between £120 and £160 a day, according to industry outfitters, with some newcomers working for free just to build experience. CNN's £140 figure lands right in the middle of that band. Even so, that is grid girls, and it is an industry estimate rather than a darts number. The truthful headline on pay comes down to this. The darts walk-on girls lost a role that made up somewhere around 60 to 80% of their income, which we know from their own mouths, yet the exact pound figure never once became public. That missing number is part of the story, because it tells you just how quietly this entire role operated, right up until the moment it ended. How did it end? Let me walk you through that week in January 2018, because everything moved fast. On the 26th of January the news broke, and the PDC confirmed that walk-on girls would no longer appear at its events. The corporation's official explanation, handed to the Press Association, arrived measured and careful. In their words, "We regularly review all aspects of our events, and this move has been made following feedback from our host broadcasters." Those broadcasters were Sky Sports and ITV. PDC Chairman Barry Hearn framed the decision around modernization, warning that the walk-on girls risked becoming, in his phrase, incompatible with inclusive family viewing. Here is a detail that makes his position far more interesting. Not long before the reversal, Hearn had actually defended the walk-on girls, insisting, "Not as long as I am the boss. I think the walk-on girls is great. I do not think it is sexist in any way." The very man who axed them had only recently promised he would never do exactly that. Whatever you make of the decision, that turnaround shows you how quickly the ground shifted beneath the sport. The first televised event without walk-on girls followed straight away. The Unibet Masters, staged at Arena MK in Milton Keynes from the 26th to the 28th of January 2018. £200,000 sat on the line at that tournament, broadcast on ITV4, where Michael van Gerwen beat Raymond van Barneveld 11-9 in the final. The new era opened right there, with no fanfare, no music cue, and no walk-on. Reaction split down the middle almost instantly. On one side, the change drew applause. On the 27th of January, one day after the announcement, Women's Sport Trust publicly praised the move, tweeting, "We applaud the Professional Darts Corporation moving with the times and deciding to no longer use walk-on girls, motor racing, boxing and cycling, your move." That closing line, "your move," proved oddly prophetic. Just days later, on the 31st of January 2018, Formula One announced it was dropping grid girls for the coming season. F1's commercial chief, Sean Bratches, explained, "This custom does not resonate with our brand values and clearly is at odds with modern-day societal norms. We don't believe the practice is appropriate or relevant to Formula One and its fans, old and new, across the world." Grid girls gave way to a program called Grid Kids. Inside a single week, darts fell first, and then F1 toppled right behind it, which made early 2018 the tipping point for the whole tradition. Among the players, opinion divided too. Michael van Gerwen, who had predicted back in December 2017 that walk-on girls would soon disappear, backed the removal, putting it plainly, "The PDC wants more people to see it as a sport. It does not interest me, it is just a sport." Raymond van Barneveld, the 5-time world champion, went the other way entirely. On the day the news broke, he tweeted, "I will really miss the girls. For me, they are a part of the darts. Sign their petition so they hopefully can keep their jobs." That mention of a petition carries us to the heart of the story, the part that complicates the tidy progress versus tradition version you usually hear, because the strongest, loudest opposition to the ban came from the walk-on girls themselves. A petition to reverse the decision launched on change.org that same day, the 26th of January, started by a man named David Shaw. It grew fast. The BBC clocked it at roughly 15,000 signatures on the 27th of January. Then it climbed toward 40,000, and its final total, according to the petition page, reached 48,742 signatures. A number some outlets later rounded up to over 50,000. Kelly Brook, herself a former Page 3 model, publicly backed the reinstatement. The women's own words landed hardest of all. Charlotte Wood told BBC Radio 5 live, "I have chosen to do this job. I go to work. I put on a nice dress. I escort darts players to the stage. I smile, and that is it." She also offered a blunter verdict. "I think the world has gone mad." Later, she flipped the feminist argument right over, saying, "In my opinion, it was a backward step for feminism, not a forward step telling women what they can't do. If we're happy doing the job, then why does it offend people?" All three matched her directness. Her line was, "It's a shame this vocal minority have ended our job like they're doing us a favor," and she pushed back hard against the idea that the role was degrading, adding, "It was so sad to see our job that we loved and were so proud of picked apart. They said it was demeaning. We couldn't have felt further from that because it was such a wonderful, safe job." One more detail from all three genuinely stings, and it concerns how the end was handled. In her words, "When people retire from the sport, they do something nice, but we got nothing. It was a text message and that was it. It felt like we were disposable." A single text message after years spent as one of the most recognizable fixtures in a televised sport, and that was the goodbye. Sit with the real tension at the center of all this, because there are honest arguments on both sides. The case for the ban ran clean and simple. The Women's Sport Trust and others argued that women in sport deserve to be judged by their sporting appeal rather than their sex appeal, while Van Gerwen and the PDC built their reasoning around family viewing and around darts earning respect as a serious sport. That is a coherent position, and it deserves to be heard on its own terms. The case against the ban, though, rose overwhelmingly from women exercising choice. The walk-on girls, female fans, players' wives, and nearly 49,000 petition signatories argued that banning the role liberated nobody, and instead stripped away a job that women had freely chosen and taken pride in. Wood called it a backward step for feminism, and that is precisely the piece the simple headline version leaves on the cutting room floor. Not every sport marched in step with darts and F1 either. Boxing largely kept its ring goals, and here sits a neat little irony. Among the promoters defending ring goals stood Eddie Hearn, whose view ran, walk-on girls aren't really doing anything, whereas the ring card girls are actually serving a purpose. It has nothing to do with sexism or feminism, it is just a part of boxing. Eddie Hearn happens to be Barry Hearn's son. The father axed the darts walk-on girls while the son went out defending the ring girls in boxing, one family landing on opposite sides of the very same argument. Now let me tell you what happened next, because the story refuses to end in 2018. For the walk-on girls, life carried on, just off the televised PDC stage. Daniela Orfrey and Charlotte Wood stayed active on the non-televised exhibition circuit, and they kept putting out annual calendars that, by their own account, sold out inside 2 days, with plenty of them bought by women for their husbands. That single detail chips away at the notion that only men ever wanted them around. Both women built commercial modeling careers on top of that, and here comes the twist. Orfrey revealed that she actually earned more from commercial modeling than she ever had in the darts, and that bookings flooded in once the ban hit. The ending never became the collapse you might expect. As of the most recent figures, Orfrey carried around 36,000 Instagram followers, while Wood held more than 28,000, and Karen Cookson, the pioneer, still runs Angels Elite and organises Miss Blackpool. 6 years on, a comeback arrived, though not through the PDC. In October 2024, Orfrey and Wood returned to television at the World Seniors Match Play, held at the York Barbican on the 4th and 5th of October, streamed on TNT Sports and BBC iPlayer, where they walked on stars including Phil Taylor. Taylor, as it happens, was Orfrey's regular player back in the day, the one she used to call her Lucky Charm. The World Seniors Darts Tour was founded by a man named Jason Francis, and he made no secret of why he brought them back. In his words, There was so much love and feeling when the girls lost their jobs. They were two of the most high-profile walk-on girls, and they were who fans asked most about. So the return came not because a corporation reversed course, but because fans kept asking for them year after year. Inside the PDC itself, the walk-on girls remain absent from televised events to this day. That 2024 comeback ran through the Seniors Tour, a separate operation driven purely by fan demand, while the PDC steered in a completely different direction, with Chief Executive Matt Porter later pushing the expansion of women's darts through the women's series. The sport moved on in more ways than one. Let me carry this back to where we started. The walk-on girls vanished from televised darts inside a single week in January 2018, pushed out by broadcasters under the banner of modern, inclusive family viewing. And that is the version most people remember. The fuller story runs messier and far more human. We never learned exactly what they were paid since the numbers stayed private, yet we know from their own words that the job made up the majority of their income and that for one of them it ended by text message. We know the loudest objections came not from traditionalists but from the women themselves, who saw a decision made about them without them. And we know that 6 years later they walked back onto a dart stage, not because anyone in charge relented, but because the fans never stopped asking. Wherever you land in this debate, hold on to that last part. The walk-on girls did not simply disappear, they were removed, and a good many of the people they were supposedly being protected from turned out to be the ones asking for them back. I would love to know where you stand on this one, so drop it in the comments. If you want more stories from the world of darts told straight, with the facts checked and the myths left out, you already know what to do.